panel today will be focusing on the use of data in business. Joining our panel is Martin Connor, founder and CEO of Healthcarelogix, Greg Strydom, who's the dealer principal at Frizelle Sunshine Automotive, and Bond academic, Associate Professor Adrian Gepp. I'd now like to introduce our panel and welcome Greg. Thank you for joining us. And Martin, thank you for being here. First to you, Greg. It's been some challenging times that we've seen in the past few months. How have you and your organisation managed to survive?
Yeah, I think 2020 has been a crazy year. It started in the beginning of the year with the bushfires and a lot of disruption. Our business extends right into remote areas like Lismore and Ballina and all the way into metro areas like Sydney and up to Brisbane. I think we found, we're really kind of under pressure in various parts of the business, and then COVID hit and all bets were off. I don't think anybody knew what to do. The whole industry, in fact, dropped more than 50% overnight. We suddenly found disruption globally, which interrupted our supply chain. And then we're faced with some very, very difficult decisions. So we found that moving quickly was the key. And immediately everyone was put onto shift type work. We dropped wages by 20%. I think it was normally a very difficult discussion with people, but employees kind of understood. We got around our employees, made sure that they felt they were safe, that the leadership was being proactive and addressing everything. It was kind of people first, making sure we all sort of made sense of what was going on. What did we need to do in terms of social distancing and what the government was telling us, and then started looking at the business, And there's a saying about how good habits are formed in tough times, and it kind of forced us to go back and saying, we unfortunately had to go through a round of redundancies, but reevaluating every role, every process. And saying, do we need to spend all this on marketing? Do we need all this headcount? Can we job share? Can we do 4-day weeks? And all of that kind of put us in quite a good position to handle what was going on. And although there was all this uncertainty, we found we rebounded quite quickly. So while the industry was, say, 50% down in April with all the shock, it sort of came back a little bit in May, went maybe 30% down, and then June we had a really, really strong month, and found that the staff were suddenly becoming kind of more engaged, and some of our sites had record all-time sales. We found that things were pushing in our favour. So we had the government support, with JobKeeper, and we had the instant asset write-off, which really helped kind of stimulate people to come buy stuff. We had some very aggressive marketing from our franchise partners, which all helped. We had the government super drawdowns, which people were using as deposits on vehicles. So all of that was kind of, that's really good, and people suddenly coming to us. And then there was this crazy kind of dynamic where, for a period in time, cars almost became the new toilet paper. As crazy as that sounds, mainly because overseas they had shut down production, and we found that they weren't building as many. And we were saying to people, look, we only have these 5. And people go, well, I better put a deposit down. And we're going, yeah, you better. And suddenly we're seeing this crazy demand. We're running out of stock. And you walked around our yards, and it was this crazy dynamic of less staff doing more, customers feeling they're going to miss out, and sort of coming through it really strong, which is really great. But we're, kind of not kidding ourselves. We don't think we're out of it yet. We're still quite nervous. We're still quite short supplied. We still got stuff happening around the country in Victoria and New South Wales, and we're kind of going, well, what if it comes here? So we're quite worried and careful. We've got JobKeeper going to end, certainly for our business. And we've also got this kind of underlying thing where people borrow money to buy cars, and the banks are still very, very skittish in lending people money. And people who've put their mortgages on hold or drawn down on super are now finding that those are kind of being looked at by the banks and going, well, so, it's a long answer to what's going on question, but I guess it's been a massive roller coaster, and we don't think it's over, but it's forced us to kind of really look at our business in a good way.
And I know for you, Martin, it's been a roller coaster too. But it'll be interested to hear your answer. It's going to be, as I know, it's similar to Greg in the fact that it's something very unprecedented, but also a totally different outcome because you're in very different industries.
Yeah. So an awful lot of what Greg said resonates, and certainly from the leadership point of view, the sense of uncertainty and volatility. Like no pieces on the board are in the same place that they were last week when the crisis hit. We're about 30 staff at the start of the crisis, all in one office. And we had an all hands meeting when it became clear that this wasn't normal. And actually we went to home working very early, about 3 weeks before the lockdown, because we had an all hands meeting. We were all sat in the office, and we've got a very bright workforce, a lot of graduates, a lot of postgraduates, a few PhDs in there. And they were saying, look, we've read the epidemiology and none of us knows whether we're infected in this room. So what are we all doing together? We're increasing the potential value of our R number by being here. So let's all go home. And we had the weekend to think about it. And on Sunday evening, I rang the directors and we wrote to everybody and said, yeah, from now, do not come back into the office tomorrow. And that was early to mid-March. Right. And we've kept distributed working. And actually that's been an interesting experiment for us. We then polled everybody with survey monkeys after the biggest bit of the crisis abated. And everybody said, we asked a question, in a perfect world, how many days a week would you work at home? Nobody said 5. Nobody said 4. 75% of our staff wanted to work 1 or 2 days a week in the office. And everybody wanted to work no more than 3. And so we did that. We calculated the floor space, and now we're on 35% of the office space we had before. And we've got a rotation for the teams to be together in functional areas. And we have a monthly celebration where we get together. But the whole thing has changed in our operating model. And of course, all of the market convulsions that everybody else went through. So it was an interesting experience to get ahead of and then try it. But for us, it was a real interesting exercise as a leadership group to find out where the heart of the staff group sentiment was and just go with it. Because at times like that, we're a community as well, you know, and it was an interesting exercise. So it turned us inside out. But as of now, touch wood, you know, things are working out, and I think it will have made us stronger in interesting ways.
Can you talk a little bit more about, you made the decision early, which means you had a lot of uncertainty ahead of you. We didn't know where it was going. How you made the call on where to sort of draw the line about what you think was going to happen, and how bigger decisions to make early or late, and that kind of idea?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I know you wanted to have some of the themes about information and data, but that particular decision was, one of the papers out of Wuhan was published quite early on. And so we went to PubMed and said, what's the research saying? And it was telling us that the mean time to the symptoms, I'm not going to get this data right, but it basically said the mean times to the symptoms appearing was something like 5 to 11 days. 95% of people will have had symptoms within 2 weeks. But that period 0 to 5 days, the set of people who've got it who don't know, asymptomatic, is very high. And of course, if you sit and think about that and you think there's 30 of us in this room, and we don't know, right? We don't know how fast it's moving in the population. We don't know whether it's in the rooms, therefore go home. So that was one data point that was very striking, and having reflected on the meaning of that made that decision very quickly. But then we had to then follow that through, of course, with all the logistics. How do we stay in touch? What does it mean for accountability? What does it mean for getting work done? How do teams operate together? All of that kind of stuff had to come in really actually for us over the course of that first weekend. And then we had to build those new systems and processes out in the next 2 weeks after that. And it was a real extraordinary time. Interestingly, though, I think we gained some trust by making that decision very quickly, because the staff group was anxious, and some of the bright people in the room saying, we don't think we should be here. And actually, on reflection, we thought, we can't argue against that. That is rationally a solid argument, therefore. Now, of course, if you're either an essential service or serving essential services, there's a different set of calculations that you'll have to make. But for us, we thought we can make this work, so let's do it.
Yeah. I mean, that's what we found, you know. Everyone was saying, should we be at home? But there's a lot of what we do, we can't be at home. You know, we had to be there. You can't service a car by sitting at home, you know, but there were parts which we could do. So, you know, the other thing that we did was, because we've got multiple locations and central teams, those central teams we decentralized. Yeah. So, you know, we didn't want the whole of admin or the whole of marketing or the whole of HR to go down if one person got it, and then we had to isolate them. So we kind of said, right, you two go there, one go there, and spread them out across all the dealerships.
What's interesting, just picking up on that, is that we had to make some decisions very quickly. Before COVID, we would kind of do email, SMS, MS Teams, something on Slack, and then we got Jira. Or when you think about the human communication structure in your company unintentionally, it's all over the place. Now we have to say, right, it's Teams. We're going to use Microsoft Teams for all of our core communications. Emails is only for things that require document exchange. SMS is only if it's an emergency. But even then, we had to get everyone's agreement. Is everyone okay to publish everybody's mobile number to everybody so that everybody can reach everybody? So there's all these kind of small things which are actually very human that say, how do we stay together even though physically we're apart for more of the time than we were before? And it was a very interesting exercise, and that's what I think we came out stronger, because you think those things through, and actually we can create quite a human system on distributed working, which has still got contact in it, but has actually got much clearer lines of communication than we had before, less confusion.
You were also talking about kind of taking all the pieces apart, and we don't know where they're going to fall. And I think some things are never going to go back the same way, because the way we've taken them apart and put them back together are actually better.
Yeah.
And we are going to save money, and we are going to be more viable if we, why can't, this is quite an effective Zoom meeting or whatever it is, because we're achieving more through it. Yeah, it's interesting.
And a lot of that is about exploiting your situation. So taking a step back. So we had two offices that we were in February, and one of the leases ran out at the end of May. So we said, well, can we live in the smaller office if we do distributed working, which we could. So we made that decision, and that saved us about $65,000 a year in rent, big office, right? And so then we said, well, what if we literally just took a third of that money and give it back to the staff? Because they're helping us out, we're all in this together, we're doing it together. And so we can now supply free parking, we now cater, because we get lunch brought in by a local cafe, which helps out the local cafe. We give better benefits to the staff. We equipped everybody with noise-cancelling microphones and earphones and their own keyboards and mice they can bring in with the workstations. And so we've got a revenue saving of about $40,000 a year, but the staff have got about $20,000 to $30,000 of benefits that they didn't have before. All marginal, but it's all good stuff, right? So we can share that benefit out, and we hope over time that'll be a better working week with better terms and conditions than we were able to provide before. Again, at the margins, but good overall.
Martin, so you've founded quite a unique company. Would you like to tell us a bit more about what kind of work you actually do?
Yeah.
And the kind of clients you have?
Yeah, sure. Very quickly. So Healthcarelogix and analytics, it's a tech startup, basically, in that mode, software as a service. We built a platform to help hospitals have the information they need to work better. So we've got a large scale platform. Took us about 18 months to build, and at the moment we've got about 8 clients in 5 different jurisdictions, and we were expanding quite rapidly in February. But of course, public hospitals was just about the worst place to be because they had other things on their mind. And so we had this amazing period in about week 3 or 4 of February. We got phone call after email saying project stalled. And that was government advice across the world. Nobody's doing any projects unless it's related to COVID until we know what we're dealing with. And so basically our pipeline froze, and we had 0 revenue coming in then for the foreseeable future. We didn't know that was 2 months, 6 months, 12 months. So it was interesting when you said one of the specific things you did was the 20% pay cut for staff. We took a different decision to that, also painful, where we said we don't think we can take everybody through. And so we had to have some difficult conversations with 6 staff at the start to say, we're looking at these numbers because as a startup, we're burning more cash than we're making. Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn, his favorite metaphor is that forming a startup is like jumping off a cliff and then building the aeroplane on the way down. And if you don't build it in time, you're just going to crash. And that's where we are all the time. So looking at that runway. And so we decided to go into the crisis with difficult decisions very, very quickly in the hope that that would give us the best chance of coming out the other side. And I was also very interested in what Greg said about June and July being comeback months. We've experienced that very strongly. So we were hoping that 40 to 80% of our pipeline would return, but about 120% of it's returned. So all the deals that were there before are now back. And we've got a lot more interest in the type of thing we're offering, because I think one of the crisis has taught many of us many things in many different ways. We wonder whether one of the things it's taught leaders of hospitals and other institutions is we can't carry on without really understanding what's going on with granular data, with high frequency. We can't carry on just with stories about what we think is happening. We need evidence and data and information, and we need to start moving into a new world in that space.
I mean, it's a good point, that, because you talk about the 20%. Our initial approach to our employees, it's voluntary, and I think 95% of people opted into that and said, "Look, we're happy to take some pain here because we understand."
How many staff have you got? Do you mind me asking, roughly, just so within the nearest?
We've got over 800 in Queensland, and probably the same in New South Wales.
That's interesting. Mm-hmm.
But so they all opted in. There were some people who just could not do it for whatever reason, but that allowed us to took some pressure off the redundancy thing, which came sort of second. But then you go into the data. I mean, for us, we run these large workshops, and it's all about purchasing hours. So you're buying a technician's time, and then saying, well, how many jobs can we do in that time? And so we're monitoring a lot of the data of their output. So look at their productivity, look at their efficiency, and use that to say, they might go, well, could we do it with one person less? And there might be this feeling that you can't. But then when you look at the data, it says, well, we're actually quite inefficient here because we're spending a lot of the time where we could be working on cars, moving cars. And so if we can just do some process engineering and move that to there, or get a mobile toolbox, then, hey, we can save 5 minutes per job. And guess what? That is a person. You don't need to hire again.
So do you mind if we spend a minute talking about HR? Is that okay? Because it's a massive issue. Yeah. So you got a professional HR department then, have you? And they're giving you advice about how to go about, because we got 25, 30 heads, right? So the HR's me. Yeah. But the interesting thing is that we've got this outsourced advisory, which I'd strongly recommend. Find somebody who really knows. Because when you're in this unprecedented situation, I'm thinking about Fair Work Australia. How do I actually want to do the right thing? What is the right thing? How do I do it in a way that's caring? And of course, I don't want to incur liabilities that are then going to come back because we made a misstep in the process. Yeah. And so you've got to get all of that right at the same time as well. So whichever tack you take, you then got all the regulatory aspects of it and the doing the right thing by the laws,
Yeah, I mean, as big as we are, we have an HR department, but we still take advice. And the minute this happened, we've got a specialist firm on retainer. That can help us navigate through this. So like, what are your obligations in terms of asking people to opt in for a 20% cut? Yeah, exactly. What does that do to the award rate?
How do you write the letter?
Yeah, that's right. And so the wording of all of this, and under what situation can you let people go? And can you ask people to take annual leave? Yep. Can you, if someone gets tested and is found to be negative but then goes into isolation and they want sick leave, is that sick leave, or is that, what are their rights?
Yeah, interesting.
And then when something like JobKeeper comes, we've got apprentices who earn less than what they're getting from JobKeeper, but you got to pass it on. Yeah. And then how do you manage that dynamic? So we took. I mean,
it's complex. It's just the technicals of it, let alone the emotions and the uncertainty.
I don't care how big or small you are. I mean, getting expertise is the way to go, 100%. You can't make mistakes here.
Not least because, especially as a small business in this crisis, you'd ring the experts and they'd go, no idea, never had a global pandemic before. And there's a funny reassurance about that, because the edge of what any of us knows is actually relieves your leadership somewhat, because you think, well, I can do my best in this situation, but there is no precedence. My experts have run out of road. I've now got to, in the end, follow my gut and my values and do what I think. What would I want somebody to do with me in this situation? Those kinds of eternal truths, and you have to fall back on that in the end, I think.
And there's a cultural aspect to the HR as well, because in the beginning, it's quite interesting because everyone kind of understands what's going on, and the morale is kind of a lot of camaraderie. We're all in the trenches together. We'll beat this thing. But the longer it goes on, you better be leading from the front. You better be communicating on a regular basis. You need to make fair. You got to make the workplace safe. Yeah, I mean, if you don't go and buy sanitizer and social distancing signs and stuff, at some point your staff is going to say, "Hey, you guys are doing the wrong thing here." I mean, I had a staff member just recently who went on holiday down to Sydney and got caught in these hotspots. And so the gut feel was, look, all right, come back, don't come to work, go get tested, and when the result comes, we'll assess. And so the result comes and it's negative. So then you think, okay, well, it's fine, come back. But then another staff member points out, hold on, the government regulations are they can't come back. Yeah. Because regardless if you're positive or negative, 14 days quarantine.
Yep.
So now I've got two issues. One is staff here, I don't want to get sick, but the other guy's going, hey, I want to earn.
Yeah.
And you have to go back and say you have to use annual leave. You know, and so you're just understanding your rights and what you can do.
Tricky.
Yeah.
It's an interesting point, though, if one of the outcomes of COVID is that a lot more diverse groups are starting to see the value of data and potentially how that could help us out. But obviously, Martin, this was the foundation of your company. What made you think that there was space for a startup here where you could actually use data to improve hospitals and the wider healthcare network, I guess?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, first of all, I've got 20 years in the game, so I spent a long time either working in hospitals or advising governments about hospital networks. So it's a long-standing passion of mine, and of course, it's a fundamentally important set of organisations for all of us. The hospital in most towns and cities is probably the largest employer and almost certainly the place of safety. We all need to know where it is to get our kids there at night for ED if we're worried. So the importance of it's obviously fundamental. But then inside the hospitals, I think for me, there's a fundamental difference between making decisions on the basis of some evidence, even if it's partial. We're humans, right? We make decisions anyway, and we tell ourselves stories anyway, whether or not we've got the data. But the point is, the stories we tell without the data, we make them up. It's superstition, prejudice, and intuition. And when we've got the data, we have to challenge our beliefs all the time on the basis of what the numbers are telling us. And so more specifically, I came to review probably about 5 years ago when I was thinking there's three things that I need in my information systems, which is frequency and quality and time lag. So the frequency is how often do I see it? So for a surgical waiting list, for example, I think you need to see all of that entire list every day and see how it's moving, see who needs the care today, what urgent cases have been listed yesterday. And quality is about how accurately does your data reflect the situation you're trying to understand, which is obviously every situation has its own nuances. And then third of the time lag is what's the distance in time from when the data refers to and when I see it. So actually, to make great decisions in hospitals, I say we need to see yesterday's data today. We need to see for an emergency department 5 minutes ago, now. And for people in beds, we need to see information 5 minutes ago for now, so I can literally see how my system is evolving rapidly over time. So frequency, quality, and time lag are fundamental rules for me. And when I set that over a typical hospital, they would have monthly data that was 2 weeks into the following month, which means the longest time period it describes is 6 weeks ago. Well, that's the classic trying to drive with a rear view mirror and no windscreen. And we weren't really equipped to make better decisions over time. So that was the big passion for me, is about how can we produce data which is automated so that we can begin telling stories and make decisions about what we need to do differently alone and together, rather than try and reconstruct the past and then use it to say, I told you so. Because confirmation bias means if we haven't got great data, we pick the bits that suit our story or that suit the story I'm trying to tell against you, and I emphasise those. And so I think there's a real truth issue there that we've got to try and get to and stay to and then be honest against, and that's going to be the basis for improvement.
Yeah, I really like that, because I mean the stuff that we teach through the big data centre at Bond and everything is really about that data informing and improving decision making. Yeah. And like you said, it's not necessarily that it's going to be data making perfect decision making or anything. It's just about actually providing some information to help inform it.
And there's just one other dimension, because what you just said is fundamentally important. But the other thing that I've become more interested in as I've got older is, if you're in an environment where there's great data, it changes your relationships as well. So it's not just me, the leader, or the group and this decision. It's us and our situation and how we are understanding the situation. So the stories we tell each other become different when we're constantly testing them. And then authority and credibility become different as well, because you have to justify yourself. And so you can no longer say it's this because I say so. You got to say it's this because these data points suggest it's more likely to be that than this. And I think that makes us all more honest over time. So the relational leadership is as important as the executive decision-making transactional leadership over time, more important, because relationships, I think, are more important than structures or processes in terms of growing organisations and enabling us to deal with novel situations.
It's quite fascinating because like our business doesn't have a patient waiting in a bed for a surgery. And I think for a long time, the looking at, we got tons of data, but a lot of the meaning in the data was looked like after the fact. So if you look at your accounting results, kind of took a bit of time to wrap up the month and look back and how did we go? Oh yeah, that was great. Now let's look this way, and it's changing quite fast. And I think technology is helping us do that. We use these aggregator platforms like Board FC, and where we're able to kind of suck accounting and forecasting information and really kind of look at benchmarking and where we should be and take this operational information. We've got both lead and lag metrics. So the lag metric might be, okay, that's how we did last month. But the lead metric is, look, if we keep doing this, we're going to get that result. So we better change this, like efficiency or productivity or closing ratios. And so we use a lot of time kind of looking at data for lead management and kind of operational efficiency. And now starting to shift into how do we use that to get more revenue in our business. So, if you strip the marketing expense out, where we used to just go and maybe we'll put an ad on radio, ad on TV, or put up a billboard. Why don't we go online in the digital space and look at social media, and we can target down to an individual person. I can drop, if I've got their email and they bought a car from us 3 years ago, there's nothing stopping me matching that in Facebook and actually dropping an ad into their newsfeed.
Yeah, so our director of customer success, Kate Wiley, she wrote a LinkedIn post about one of the coordination centres that we put in one of the hospitals, and it got like 6,000 views because it was related in part to the crisis. And similarly, I wrote an article about our distributed working, about how we moved to home working on mediums called Postcards from the Edge, and it got thousands of views. And that is a very interesting new move. We've never been able to afford marketing, right? Because that's not quite where we are. But there is a different type of conversation, I think, starting on social media, where it's not just about products and selling, it's about who you are in the world and what types of things are important to you and how people can connect with that. And I think that is going to create a very interesting new dynamic in the future.
There's this whole emergence of marketing automation and lead nurturing, and so because we operate largely in a franchise world, we've got the parent companies who have got the budget and they're kind of nurturing early hand raisers. But once someone touches your business in one way, maybe picks up the phone or sends an email or even just lands on your website, you now have the ability to kind of go, well, hold on a second, you've raised your hand up here. We're going to gently feed you stuff until you come down the funnel, until you actually walk into our showroom, and then we're going to help you buy a car, and then customers for life. And
so can I just pick up on? Can I just ask Greg? Yeah. So one of the comments you made before was about leading and lagging indicators. Yeah. So which of those are more important for you?
Well, it depends who you're asking. I think if you're asking the shareholders, they'll go, show me the money, or show me the returns. But I think managing on a daily basis, the lead metrics are what you look at.
I think that's true as well. And so for example, we outsource our accountancy as well to a fantastic group in Brisbane who are just really, really great, and they help us in so many ways. But the profit and loss statement that the board will get for me is I don't think I can say this actually. I do look at it, but it's not. But the point is, I'm not. The profit and loss statement for me is a way to describe where we've been, but it's literally meaningless on a day-to-day basis to me. Whereas the cash flow, I put more energy into my cash flow than anything else because I got this Excel spreadsheet with every single transaction, and we reconcile our cash flow to our bank balance at the last day of every fortnight after the pay run, to the dollar. And I've got our operations manager whose job it is to make sure those numbers add up. So we literally know where we're going to be, our zero cash day, every significant transaction that comes in, and then crucially, of course, every hiring decision. We can then build scenarios that say, if I bring what's my average cost per head, will this hire bring that up or down? Does it bring my zero cash day forward? But when you think about it, all that is, when it's properly constructed and true to the bank, so true to source, that's a leading indicator of whether we're going to have enough to make payroll and whether we've got enough to bring this higher on, given these different revenue assumptions. And I think the leading indicators are where the whole game is, and the lagging indicators are just saying whether or not your overall decisions were the right ones. You know?
I mean, there was a book and subsequent movie a few years ago called Moneyball, which was all about, how they looked at those leading metrics. How many times we get on base, how many times we get inside 50, how many times we get on the fairway in golf or whatever it is, because forget about all the rest. If you do that, the correlation to success is going to be better. Yeah. And so for us, for example, we have a lot of inventory, and, just tracking the days in stock or if we are listing vehicles online, the amount of views and the amount of, how long they've been on the page, and the amount of kind of days without an inquiry, are all indicators of we better do something. Yeah. Instead of waking up 3 months down the track and saying, oh, wow, why isn't that car sold? Well, it's because it hasn't had a lead for 3 days. Well, why? Because it doesn't have a photo. Oh, okay.
And the other massive thing for me in this space is this phrase, form follows function, which is one of my absolute slogans. I must say it 5 times a day. And what form follows function means is that you've got to decide what you're trying to achieve before you can best decide how to go about it. And then spending time thinking, what are we trying to achieve? What's really important to us here? I think is the start of everything. And then for me, a lot of it is about the hunt for the lead indicator. So I remember maybe 15 years ago, we used to have these monthly surgical waiting list reports, and it was, there's 200 people waiting for a hip or whatever it was. What's the leading indicator of that? Because that was all we had at the time. And so we went on a hunt for the lead indicator. And it turns out that the lead indicator in a hospital is a coefficient that says, has this surgeon got too many patients on their waiting list? So that if the future's like the past and they carry on treating people at the same rates, and they generally do, and if it's a surgeon, don't hurry up, take all the time you need, don't rush me. We need them to take just as much time as they need to do a great job. And so they can only do so much work, that's absolutely right. But if the future's like the past and I've got 60 patients on my list and I can only do 20 in a month, you're going to have a waiting list. No. So if we can find the leading indicator and track that every day, as you were saying, if we can make the leading indicator is great if when it looks good, the lagging one always looks good. And there's a real strong tie between what we're actually managing and what actually happens. Yeah. And I think if you can get that logic right, you're connecting the present to the future in a way that means you can really have confidence in your decisions.
I mean, our industry is one of the most over-surveyed industries in the world, where we ask customers consistently, what did you think of that? Are you completely satisfied? Would you recommend us? Net promoter scores.
Net promoter scores, yeah.
And it drives us mental, to be honest. But it's very important information, because all of that's linked to, loyalty, transactional value, whether people come back again, and then you can drop your marketing expenses, and we got to be doing a good job.
And for us, that's massive, because the whole thing about our company is about can we turn our customers into advocates? So can we not only deliver the service that has been paid for, but can we surprise and delight people in a way that they say, we're now working with a company and we've never had a relationship with them. So the thing that gives us the greatest joy as a group of directors is when one of our customers says, we've never worked with a company quite like this before. You don't respond in the way that especially with software, because there's a reputation for all change notices and everything's got to be written down and it'll cost you a fortune to make any amendment anywhere. And we've all been burned by that. And if we can surprise and delight and we turn customers into advocates, then they will bring the next customers. And we've seen that. You must see that all the time. There's nothing greater than when somebody comes and says, I've been told you're great by these other people. I had this amazing experience in one hospital where I was sat in a room of sceptical surgeons, which isn't hard to find. Many surgeons are sceptical, particularly about data and management systems. And one of them said, this all looks good, but how is it going to help us? And there was a nurse in scrubs with the hat on and the full Monty who just come out of the theatres that morning, and she said, I visited another hospital in this area that's got this system, and they said it's transformed the way we've worked. And it was absolutely joyous, because we weren't in the room. That wasn't a marketing message. It was a customer meeting a prospective customer
Yeah.
And they were just telling each other, this has been really good for us and these are good people to work with. And you can't buy that, of course, but also it's worth more than anything else, I think.
But then that was, again, data and analysis, but actually
Absolutely.
making a real change. It's not about just the number that's produced on a dashboard or something. It's that the whole point is that it actually goes back into the business and
which delivering value. And
Yes.
how do we define the value? What are we trying to achieve? And what data do we need to help us achieve that thing? And I think that applies in any situation, is being clear about those, clear about what you're trying to achieve, and then look for the leading indicators that will tell you if you're moving towards it rather than away from it. And I think that's massive.
I mean, your form versus function things, or
Form follows function.
form follows function is an interesting observation as well, because we have so much data, and I think every business does, but and at some point you can kind of overanalyze, and just have so much information that no decisions are made, and you're starting to measure things that aren't even relevant just for the sake of it, and asking people to report. And that's why you got to go, but we always kind of start with why. Why do you want to know that? Why are you asking them to pull out that particular piece of information? Which is the kind of search for the meaning in that piece of information. Otherwise, don't bother, because they're getting flooded.
I think we take exactly the same idea, express it in a slightly different way. So you say why, we say if it's not actionable, or if it's not going to change our beliefs, then forget it. We don't need to collect it, we don't need to track it, we don't need to monitor it. So is it going to change our actions? Is it going to change our beliefs or our stories? And if not, you use the word relevant there, which I think should have a capital R, because now we're in a world where there's more data than any human consciousness can ever possibly understand. So what's relevant is more important than what's accurate. Because if I've got a perfectly accurate piece of data that doesn't bear on my situation, it can't have meaning for me. If I've got relevant data that's inaccurate, I can work on the accuracy. So relevance is more important than accuracy, and ultimately we've got to refine it down based on the why question, I think.
Because the risk is, and I'll give you a practical example, we have sales managers in all of our showrooms. And they have typically good people skills, they're good with customers, they're good at selling, they're good at connecting and building relationships. But the data and the systems have interestingly forced them back into their offices behind their computers. And there's like this new breed of manager that just sits behind the computer. And, whereas we're going, well, we need you out there because that's what you're good at and that's actually what we need to happen. So how do you find the balance between kind of, you've got all this data, you've got all these reports that need to be done. So just pick the important ones,
There's that, and also that was a very important thing for us, because releasing time to care is a really important bit of the public care movement, public hospitals movement. So one of our design principles for the platform was we're only going to use data that gets routinely collected as part of the business process. No new data entry, no new data manipulation, no new reporting requirements. We're just going to extract from the data that's already there and try and make that meaningful for people, so there's no increased load. For, like in our world, it would be nurses and doctors stuck behind terminals, and that's there's enough of that already, as they would say.
It's fascinating because you talk about things like, we need to know the why, or different ways of saying that question or having a point and relevance, and then making use of existing data, and then quality of data, and the fact that, we get it in a timely manner, and all these things. And pretty much we could have had this entire conversation pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, and everything that's said was highly relevant, as I'm listening. And that seems to be what your experience is, that everything's changed, but you're still using that to help inform your decisions. It's just that the decisions and the data coming in are very different.
Yeah, well, the people are the same. So, we're what, 260,000 years old as a species or something. So everyone who's alive today is like 3.5 billion years of warm, salty wetness that's been a completely unbroken chain of life, right? That's not going to change in the space of any one crisis. And I think some of the things that Greg's talked about in terms of relevance and timeliness and leading lagging indicators, I think they're the toolbox of leadership and management. That's not going to change in a crisis. So I think there are, and whether or not you got enough cash to make payroll, that's a fundamental, that there are objective facts of the situation that are going to drive your anxiety, which are going to be the same no matter what. I think in an interesting way, the crisis gives you new permissions to do things you couldn't have done before, and it gives you more creative thinking and potentially brings people together if our leadership's in a good place for us to try things collectively that we wouldn't have tried before. But I think you're right, underlying the truths are the same.
Fascinating.
I guess just Obviously, a great deal of experience here and the use of data in this time, which we've been talking about. If there is some businesses or organisations watching this video now, what tips or pointers could you give them about using data? And we've covered that, but to summarise, what would be 2 or 3 tips regarding analysing data, using data, or when not to use data, perhaps? Greg, what would you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go back to the last point I made. I mean, start with why. And if you can understand why you're doing this, why you're looking at the data, why do you want to look at it, then it kind of, with that end in mind, the rest kind of falls into line. And then you're picking relevant stuff. You're doing it for the right reasons, and then it starts helping your decision making. The other point I'd make is, in a smaller business, you often don't have the expertise. And we mentioned kind of reaching out to the right type of people with HR, but I would think that it applies in most kind of parts of the business.
Yeah.
Is that get the right technology in place. You spoke about having different platforms.
Yeah.
Think about that, and don't forget the basics of the business, which is about efficiency, about productivity, about getting people paid. And while all of this is happening, just keep your head screwed on, focus on the basics.
No, that's great. And Martin, any final pointers for our viewers?
It's such a difficult question because all the situations, everyone's situation is going to be so different, right? I'd certainly back up everything that Greg said. I think I'm just going to repeat that because one of the big things for us was having a network of relationships. They're not expensive, so if you can find the right people, so we got legal, we got finance, we got HR. My rule is if you don't want to be world class at it, outsource it. And what that means for small businesses is find someone who you can get into a relationship with and either put on a very cheap retainer or a good hourly rate and just have them there to reach out to solve what are some technical and knotty problems. And then just to reinforce what Greg said, that question about the why, form follows function. What are we trying to achieve first? And therefore, what do we need to know? And then go on the hunt for the leading indicator. What can I know today that will tell me if I'm on the right lines or not, or if I need to change what I'm doing so that my lagging indicators will look good. And the lagging indicator ultimately is going to be, have I got enough cash in the bank to make payroll? I just keep going back to that. Like small businesses, I mean, that's just a constant fear.
Everyone wants to get paid.
Including the small business owners.
That's right.
Well, that's great. Thank you both so much for your time, and thank you for tuning in to Business Now, and we'll see you next time.